morning as we continue in a sermon series conversation called How to Be Rich, and it's based upon a book and a curriculum that's been put together by Andy Stanley, a pastor from the Atlanta area. It's talking about what does it mean to be faithful stewards of our money and our resources and our time. And we started last week, we talked about how there's a unique calling for us as Christians when we have margin, when we have extra money lying around. There's something that we should have an obligation, a healthy obligation to do with those resources. And so today we're going to talk about side effects, because like any good thing, there's always side effects. I don't know about you, but when I started into the workforce and I got my first paycheck, I started thinking to myself, this isn't a lot of money, but one of these days I'm going to get more and it's going to take care of all of my problems. I mean, I was thankful for the little that I had, but I knew there was going to be a day where I was going to have a little bit more perhaps, and it was going to get a whole lot easier. And here's what I found. I still have side effects, even though I'm earning more today than I did on that day. There's certain side effects that are available to those who have a margin of resources and finances. We're going to talk about those from the scripture text this morning. When I think about side effects, I think about some of these commercials that are on TVs these days, right? This is a still frame. I don't want to tell you what commercial it's from. You can imagine, but they always tend to do this. Whenever they get to the disclaimer about side effects, they always put a cute couple up there, almost to distract us from the side effects that could happen by taking this medication. I don't know if you've discovered it, but have you ever found like the medication that they're prescribing to try to meet this health issue in our lives, when it gets to the side effects, it says a leading cause and side effect might be the thing that you're exactly what you're taking the pills for. Isn't that ludicrous, right? I think there's a driver inside of our human experience. We want to imagine that there could be a day where everything is taken care of and nothing can touch us. I think philosophers would call this the sublime picture of life, where we're above everything and all the problems. And I think sometimes we can't help but render that finances are a big or only piece of that. What we're going to find in the wisdom tradition, though, in the scripture text, that even an increase in wealth has some side effects. So let's go back to 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 17, because this is a passage that we're covering for these 4 weeks. And the Apostle Paul, writing to his protege Timothy, he talks about some side effects. He says, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth. Those are some side effects, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. So even the Apostle Paul, even in the first century, even in a different part of the world, he saw that those who were rich in this present world, who had a margin of resources, that they were exposed to some side effects that they needed to address. And it wasn't just the things in particular, but like there's something underneath it all that's empowering these side effects that we need to confront. And it's the same in our day and time. Here's just a couple of side effects that for those who are rich in this present world are exposed to. The first one is that we live in denial if we're rich in this present world. You ever notice how sometimes rich people don't talk about that they're rich, and maybe because it's not socially acceptable to do so, but it doesn't stop us from talking about other stuff that we feel like that we're good at, that we like in this life. For instance, there is a SEC football team who has not done so well this year, but they won yesterday, and everybody's bringing out the orange. Okay? You don't have to key them up. They just want to talk about it, okay? Extroverts like to brag about how they're extroverted. Introverts like to, well, they don't brag so loudly. They say that they're thankful that they're introvert, not like their idiot extrovert brother. Okay, they begin to talk about that part of their life. If there's a restaurant that they enjoy, they will talk about it. People who do CrossFit, they feel like they can talk about CrossFit in any conversation. You can say, I love mashed potatoes. They say, oh, that reminds me of CrossFit. There's a workout called, potatoes and gravy. That's just an amazing, and CrossFit's amazing. Okay, they find a way to talk about it. But when it comes to acknowledging that we might be rich in this present world, no one wants to talk about it. In fact, the Gallup organization, they did a poll recently, and they tried to figure out what is the magic sweet spot? What is the annual earning that once you make that amount of money, you kind of realize that you're a little bit further ahead than somebody else, that you might have some extra lying around. So they asked some folks who made $35,000 a year, and they asked them, what would it take, what annual salary would you need to make in order to feel like you had all your needs covered? And they said, well, it's not $35,000. It would be about $70,000 or so, okay? So they asked some folks who made $70,000 a year. They said, now, what would it take if you don't feel rich today, if you don't feel like all your needs are met today, what would it take for an annual earning to feel like you've crossed the bridge, that you're a place where you're in a place of safety and comfort in your financial resources? They said, $150,000. Notice the trend here. Everybody's saying, if I just had double of what I currently have, then I'll know that I've crossed the line. Money Magazine did a poll of their annual subscribers. They said, how much would it take? What's the dollar amount of liquid assets available that would convince you that you had all of your needs met? And their collective research came to the conclusion of $5 million. So not 1 million, not 3 million. Five is what it takes. So here's what Andy Stanley says. You notice how, like, nobody knows that they're rich, but we all know people who are rich. He says maybe for the fact that it doesn't dawn upon us, that we haven't had like a push notification telling us that we're rich in this present world, that has convinced us that we don't need to worry about it, and because that we don't worry about it, we are plagued with problems because we're not so good at being rich in this present world. We seem to turn a page or to make a change, to do something different with our lives when we cross over from not so rich in this present world to rich in this present world. So we live in denial. And because of that, we don't organize our life in order to live wisely. The second thing is that we are plagued with discontent sometimes as a side effect if we're rich in this present world. You ever notice how rich people like to buy stuff? I remember when my wage went up and we knew that we had enough money to cover our needs, that Amazon was shopped all the time in our household. In fact, we have to take, since we live in Bartlett, we take our recycling over to the Putty Fats. And the first few times we took our recycling over there, Scott Putty Fat said, I've never seen so many Amazon boxes in 1 or 2 weeks period of time. And it's because when you buy stuff, it's like an appetite. Whenever you feed an appetite, it grows. When you starve an appetite, it shrinks. And whenever we go from one earning wage and we kind of increase it, we begin to get discontent with things that we have in our life. Sometimes those of us who are rich in this present world, we kind of do some weird things. Like, for instance, we can have perfectly good kitchen cabinets and counters. I mean, they've been suiting us well for some time now. The counters are flat and they're level. If something is spilled on them, we can clean them up. We can put a hot pot from the stove on it and it won't burn. It's like magic. But one day, even though we've been totally content with those counters, that still works so well. One day we walk in and say, you know what would be a good idea? I got a flyer in the mail. Let's tear all these out and get the same size counters in the same place and see how that goes. We have this discontent. We seem to fall prey to this term in our culture called upgrade. We have a perfectly good phone, but then we see this advertisement that they'll take that phone if we give them 500 more of our dollars. And we could take that to a store, and we can leave our perfectly good phone there and our $500 there, and it has to stay there. And we get a perfectly good phone when we leave the store. It's crazy. I got a letter from Wolf Chase Toyota because I drive a Prius, and they said, we're looking to expand our used car inventory, and it seems like you have the car that we're looking for. And your car can be worth $10,500. Why don't you come and talk to us about it? I almost felt morally obligated to help Wolf Chase Toyota to increase their used car inventory. Sure, there might be a couple of coffee stains on the mats, but it's still a perfectly good car. But I would have to take that car and leave some money, or at least an agreement of more money, a monthly payment, in order to drive another perfectly good car away from the lot. We seem to fall prey and engage in a whole lot of strange habits that people will look into our eyes and say, why are you doing such things? Imagine someone walk into a closet full of clothes that they spent time shopping for. They tried on several things before they bought those things. And to go in front of that closet of clothes and say, I just don't have anything to wear. Open the refrigerator. There's no food in here and it's full. Let's get takeout today, right? We are discontent. We feed an appetite that is never satisfied. That's one of the side effects of being rich in this present world. How about this one? This is the one that the Apostle Paul said. So don't hate the preacher. I'm just reading from the Bible here. A side effect of those who are rich in this present world, we can become arrogant. We are tempted to become arrogant. And you and I have seen this. Definitely not anyone else in this room, but imagine it with me. You get a little raise at work. You get a company phone. You get a different office. You get some people to supervise. And all of a sudden you think you're the CEO of the world now. Because our boss gave us a little more authority, we feel like we can butt into any conversation and give our 2 cents. Like someone's talking about working out in the gym. Oh, you're not doing that right. Oh, thanks. I didn't ask you. We're thinking about painting our house. What color? Oh, that's a terrible color. Oh, great. Who are you again? We seem to think that we're in charge of more than we're really in charge of because we've been getting a little bit of influence and we've got a little bit further down the road. So we give hot takes. We get that master's degree. We know more than our contemporaries. We ask them gotcha questions. We belittle people and big league them because we got a little bit of extra resources. Now we're taking a mile and think that we can exert that authority on others around us. I heard a study in 2013 that was done about some drivers in California. They had a state law about crosswalks. If someone is ready to walk across the road, no matter where you are or where it is or how fast you think you can drive, you have to stop and yield to those pedestrians. And so they found that people weren't exactly following this law. So there was an academic and a researcher began to post his teams at some of these crosswalks. And what they did is they found out if there was a relationship to people not obeying the law in the car that they're driving. And what he found was that those who were driving cars that have a social superiority attached to it, that they were less likely to follow the laws for crosswalks and for four-way stops. Someone seemed to think that since I drive this car and earn this much, the rules don't necessarily apply to me. Remind me of a saying about those, and we love BMW drivers, but this was too good to pass up, that no matter how good a BMW's brakes are, it always stops with a jerk. Love you, BMW drivers. So does Jesus. You are open to come worship here, but nevertheless, okay? So we just seem to think because we got a little bit more that we can take, that we can loom large over any room that we're in, any conversation. We can give a hot take, we can give our 2 cents, and so on and so forth. And so why does this happen? We didn't used to be this way. Why are we this way now? The writer of 1 Timothy, Paul, as he writes to Timothy, he talks about this further, but he goes back further. If we go to 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10, he talks about the love of money. Notice that he accentuates not just money itself, but the love of money and the temptations, the side effects that it has. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and have pierced themselves with many griefs. Notice the language here. They have wandered from the faith. They used to be in the center of the faith, allowed the faith to govern their decisions and to govern their values. But their love for money has caused them to wander from the faith, and they've pierced themselves with many griefs. I was talking to a fellow preacher about this passage. He said, this passage has this metaphor in mind. In Paul's day, the writer of this text, people used to ride on sailboats and sail ships, but they weren't the ones that could really go into the deep parts of the ocean. So even though you were on a boat and you could travel somewhere faster, it had to stay close to the coastline. So even though it seemed like a good idea to get on a boat, they were prone to shipwrecks again and again. So imagine that, paying a huge piece of money, or a part of money, to get on a boat only to worry the whole time that you're going to be shipwrecked at some point. And that's what happens in Paul's mind when we give ourselves over to the love of money. Sure, we might have more square feet in the house. Sure, we might have more at our disposal. Sure, we might have more influence. But it certainly doesn't take away the grief and the anxiety and the unknown of the life around us. It's a side effect. Going back to verse 17 of 1 Timothy chapter 6, Paul says this, he asks the people who are rich in this present world not to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain. Once again, we think once we get certain earning percentage that it all goes away, but Paul's seen it again and again. It doesn't go away. In fact, sometimes the uncertainty just picks up and there's a whole host of other problems at our disposal. He gets this idea from Jesus. In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus is talking about wealth, and don't blame Jesus because he sees these temptations even in his day. He talks about money all the time in the gospel text. He says this, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to one and despise the other. And notice this, you cannot serve both God and money. Notice the language there. I think initially as we start to earn in our life, we think we just need money to take care of the bills. But it begins to grow a different type of identity in our lives. Jesus says you can actually be so obsessed with money that you serve it, and it becomes the master over you. The term here in the original language is of a field servant in the Greco-Roman world, waking up before the sun comes out to work in a field and to work on a field that's not yours, nor do you get any of the profits from it. Jesus says you can hand your life over to God and serve his purposes. Or money, if you give it a foothold, it could take a hold of you and do a number on you. So how do we get out of this trap? How do we back away from having this type of influence over our lives? Well, the book of Proverbs comes with an interesting prescription. It says, this is what the writer of Proverbs says, keep falsehood and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. I dare somebody in this room, I dare any of us to begin to pray this prayer. Don't give me too much and don't give me too little. Here's the rationale. Otherwise, I may have too much and I may disown you and say, who is the Lord? Or I may become poor and steal and so dishonor the name of our God. Let me make a couple of observations here. Notice he says, dishonor you, or to disown you. To disown something means you have something and then you disown it. The person who had too much was tempted to say, who is God? But they didn't say that earlier in their life. But they come to a place where God doesn't matter in their life anymore. Another observation about this text is simply this. Both for those who have much and those who have too little, they have the same temptation to neglect to put their trust and their hope in God. Proverbs 18:11 says this about riches, about those who contain them. The wealth of the rich is their fortified city. They imagine it a wall too high to scale. That's another side effect of riches and the love of money, is that we think that we can build a wall tall enough to keep everything else out. But it's all a figment of our imagination. So let's put this in a summary here. In sum, money can cause us to live in denial, to be plagued with discontent, and to be tempted to be arrogant. I don't know about you, but if this is what my best man Terry Johnson said when he toasted me at my wedding, it would be a devastating day. Everybody raise your glasses. Joe is living in denial. He is plagued with discontent, and he's arrogant. Cheers. Or for our parents to say, oh, I got so much hope for this individual. I hope that they live in denial. I hope that they're plagued with discontent. And I have hope above all things that all their friends say, they're pretty arrogant at times. No. This is the hope. This isn't how we start out. This is something that grows within us. And so I just conclude simply this way. What a crummy version and vision of a God money is. What it does to us. The joy that it steals from us. And the way that it shipwrecks our life. So we've got to find a way forward. I love what Paul does. Paul doesn't just say money's bad, so avoid it. Everybody live in complete and utter and obvious poverty. No, he says something further in verse 17, and this is the hope that he brings. But put your hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Paul says there's a decision to make. You can be lured away into the temptation of loving money to where it plunges you deep in all these different side effects and sadness and unravels your life. Or you could put your hope in God and notice that God richly provides for us, not just enough, but more than we could ever have imagined. But ultimately it leads to this conclusion, our joy. Going back to the image of what our parents would want best for us. I think our parents would want us to experience the depth of joy. And so once again, it's not about the counters, it's not about the car, it's not about the phone. That's too easy of a point to make. The conclusion is do you and I have joy as we possess things and as we think about our resources? If not, then the Apostle Paul gives us a warning. Our hope might be migrating. It might be migrating away from the God who provides all things and gives us joy to something else that will rob and steal from us and cause us to be subhuman. And so this day, my hope, my admonishment as a fellow brother in Christ is to check and to discern our hope this morning, to make sure it's navigating and migrating towards God and not towards the stuff or the things that we want our stuff to provide for us, because it never will satisfy. I think some of you heard this week that I lost my last grandparent, my grandma Gail, and we traveled to Kansas to go be at a funeral, to be with our family, and to celebrate her life. And when I think about this topic, I think about my grandma Gail, because she grew up in meager circumstances. She was adopted. She was given up by her birth mom, and she was adopted by a family in Perry, Oklahoma. If you've never been to Perry, Oklahoma, man, don't worry about it. You haven't missed anything. But they create some fantastic people, including my grandma Gail. And this is something I noticed about her, that even though she didn't have an advanced degree, even though she didn't have a bachelor's degree, even though she probably barely got through high school, even though she wasn't able to do many things, she was able to excel in some things. But here's one thing that she excelled in. She knew the power of generosity. And at the end of her days, as we all share stories about who she was and how she lived, again and again, people will say what the scripture says, that a great name is better than great riches. And Gail Davis had an amazing name because she shared, because she distributed, because she didn't put her hope in wealth, because it was so uncertain. But she put her hope in God. So my challenge to us as we prepare to be dismissed this morning is to put our hope in God and allow our money-making decisions and our purchasing decisions to follow along with it.